Okay, everybody, welcome back to Jewish Teen Talk.
Hi, everyone.
We have a very special guest with us. Maybe Bashi will introduce.
Of course, maybe Leigh, you'll tell us about what you do, but we're so excited to have you on Jewish Teen Talk, especially because we have questions that have come in that are very delicate, but very, very important. And we are so appreciative that Jewish Teen Talk is a safe space. Sorry for my voice; it's totally shot today. But we're so grateful for these questions that have come in, because some of these questions, people hold on to and they feel so alone and they don't know where to turn.
Right.
And Baruch Hashem, we have this forum, we have this podcast where, this is a safe place where people can send in anonymous questions and we can address them right here. So Leigh, without further ado, I'd love if you can just, let our listeners, let our viewers know a little bit about what you do and why you're here today.
Sure. Okay. So I run a nonprofit organization called, my voice is also shot, sorry. I run a nonprofit organization called The Long Short Road. And our main focus is suicide prevention, education, and also crisis management. So the organization was started in 2019, but I've been doing suicide prevention since 2016. And I got started in suicide prevention actually working with teens specifically. I was the creative director at C-Teen for many years and was seeing these issues, very intense issues, come up all the time. And so I wasn't a professional, didn't come to this by that background, but I'm a professional now because that was the role that I felt called to fill. Like that was this is my shluchus,
Yeah.
But so since 2016, like almost 7 years, been working with teens who are struggling with suicide, with their families, supporting the kids themselves, and also helping parents navigate this very challenging and delicate topic. And trying to help people who are struggling understand that this issue that they are dealing with does not mean that they're broken.
Right.
And doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with them and that healing is not possible. Actually, I'm wearing a shirt today that says healing is messy. For that exact reason, because I think especially for young people, and I'm happy to go into like the science behind this. It's like my favorite thing is going into the science behind suicide, because I think that once you have an understanding of what's happening in your brain, it makes it less scary. And you also understand like, oh, I'm not broken. This is how I'm operating. And like, there's ways for me to get better that are not, God forbid, life or death,
Wow.
So I think that would be a really good place to start with the science.
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to do a hand model and you guys can do it with me. Actually, I loved showing this to people. Like when I learned this for the first time, it was like, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So
sorry to interrupt again. I just want to, we might be doing some of this on YouTube and also on Spotify, just audio.
Okay.
We'll try to describe it as well.
Okay, sure. Okay, so anyone who's listening either on audio or video, you can follow along. If you hold up your palm, okay? So if you hold up your palm and like the bottom of your wrist, leading up until about like the base of your palm, that would be your spinal cord, right? And then right here at the base of your palm would be where your brainstem is. Now, if you take your thumb and you fold your thumb over your palm, this whole area here is basically what we call the bottom half or downstairs part of your brain. So like from the base of your neck, basically up until like the bridge of your nose, right, is where your bottom half of your brain is. Now, this part of your brain is consists of the brainstem, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the limbic system. Those are all big fancy words. What does that mean? This is the part of your brain that is responsible for big emotion. So like anger, sadness, shame, joy, whatever it is, this is the part of the brain that it's like originating from and basically emanating out to your whole body, right?
And it's at the bottom, it's at the beginning of your spine, at the
top of the spinal cord.
Top of your spine, so like neck to nose.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you take your top 4 fingers and you fold them over your thumb, now you have your prefrontal cortex, so like your forehead.
Right.
So like this part, right? So prefrontal cortex, specifically the middle prefrontal cortex, which is like right here, right? This is the part of your brain that's responsible for like logical, rational decision-making, healthy choices, empathy for yourself and others. What else? I said logical, rational decision-making, gut feelings, all the big processes that basically help you. Like, here's how I like to describe this. This is the part of your brain, the bottom half is the part of your brain that thinks, that acts before it thinks. The top half of your brain is the part that thinks before it acts. Okay? Now, here's the thing though. Between the ages of 10 to 30, when a young person is at the apex of development for their whole lives, right? The top half of the brain, which is responsible for all of your rational, logical processing, is under construction. So you can almost think of these two levels of the brain like two floors of a house, right? So the first floor of your house is fully renovated, it's beautiful, it's furnished, there's pictures hanging on the walls, there's curtains, there's everything, right? The second floor is under construction. So there's like a hole in the ceiling, there's wires hanging from here, the plumbing isn't working. The thing about the teenage brain that I think is helpful for people to understand is that when you are operating with like a less than optimal brain, that doesn't mean that you're broken. It also doesn't mean that you're not capable of accessing this part. It's just harder to do because, right? Like the same way that you don't expect, you don't go into a house that's under construction and be like, well, why isn't it working? You know why it's not working, because it's being fixed, right?
Right.
Now, the thing about being a teen, besides for the brain structure, is that for those basically 20 years of your life, I think the thing that people don't understand also is that being a teenager is not just like, 13 to 18. From a development standpoint, you are still a teenager until you're 30, because your brain is still going through that construction process until you're 30. That can be a little scary for people when they hear that the first time. They're like, what? I'm going to be like this until I'm in my 30s? That's crazy.
For a lot of other people, it makes total sense.
Right. For anyone who's over 30, like when I turned 30, I was like, wait, oh my gosh, I get it now. I see that. So besides for the brain structure, processing and remodeling and all that stuff, you're also going through a lot of big changes. Your body is changing, your relationships are changing, you're learning who you are and basically what kind of adult you're going to become. You're not a child anymore, but you're not an adult. But I do think that teenagers get held to a higher standard of like, oh, you're 15, you should be able to do A, B, C, D. Not necessarily. Yeah. Right. Yeah. This is also the time period in a person's life where they are more likely to be diagnosed with a mental health condition. This is, 15 to 18 is really when we see these things develop. Not always diagnosed, but the onset can occur during this time. The Rebbe spoke extensively about the power of youth and how youth has, the potential. And, if we nurture them in these years, they really have the potential to become the best leaders of the next generation. Right. And that comes with a lot of responsibility. And it comes with a little, it comes with a lot of responsibility. And if the teenage mind, body, and neshama are not being nurtured in a way that helps them in the best way possible to become the person they will be, right? Because it is a very challenging time and it is fraught with a lot of difficulty, and they are navigating a lot of firsts with, forget what's going on inside for a second. Just the world around them is changing. Their relationships are changing. Their relationship to their parents are changing. New schools, new responsibilities, going away to yeshiva for the first time, going away from home, getting into seminary, not getting into seminary, right? Not getting accepted. Like all these big firsts are happening when really your brain and your body are also like in a whole development process. So it's a lot of opportunity for growth and healing. There are opportunities also for distress and overwhelm. And so it's both and. But what I find, and what I can say to be true from my own experience of being a teenager, is that I felt probably 100% of the time that I was just like a an anxious walking bubble of shame and anger, right? Like I wasn't necessarily tapping into like my awesome potential. And even when I was, like, I wasn't seeing it that way. And like, I was looking at the questions that you guys sent me last night, and it's like, it's so fascinating to me how even, you know, I'm an adult. I'm looking at these questions and I'm like, wow, I remember feeling like this when I was 15, 16, 17.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
Like, you know, their experiences are unique for them because they're a unique individual with their own story. But the experience of being a teenager and feeling that sense of hopelessness is not unique to these individuals.
Yes.
Right.
And I think it's
So like,
it's so important for, you know, for teenagers to know that. When I was a teenager, I felt so alone, and I have seen through my years, you know, becoming an adult as well, that the loneliness is when we suffer. And
oh, totally.
Pain is inevitable. Pain in this world, unfortunately, Hashem created it for a reason, and it's going to happen. But there's no reason why anyone in this world should feel alone, that they're going through it on their own. Nobody understands. Nobody can help me.
Yeah.
Really.
Because the suffering is optional.
I think we also.
I literally have that on my wall, Bashi.
Yeah.
Pain plus resistance equals suffering.
Yeah.
Pain, difficulty, challenge, stress happen. We cannot change that, but we do not have to suffer. That we can opt out of. That's on my wall. I read it every morning before I start my day.
Wow.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I need that reminder too. I think it's important for teens to hear, like, adults are not, it's not like we grew up and now we're like, oh, we're good.
Yeah.
Right?
Anybody who's over 30 is no longer struggling with any of these things.
Oh,
I think
no
that
way.
so many of us relate to these things. I think these questions are applicable. You know, they're definitely experienced mostly by teenagers, but they're applicable to anyone.
Absolutely.
And I'll add that I've met people who are in their 40s that, you know, they still have these underlying feelings. They still,
Absolutely.
you know, so even though.
Oh, so
and, yeah.
I know that we're not totally on camera, but I'm just going to show you something that I have on my desk from a class I did for teens yesterday. You know, these Russian nesting dolls?
Yes.
So what's inside this doll?
So it's
like 12 other ones, right? So the way I like to describe it to people is like, you know, if you're 15 and you're like that little doll, right? As you become an adult, you're adding layers of experience.
Yeah.
And it's so maybe you're not 15 in age anymore, but the experience of who you were then stays with you and does shape who you become.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I will still have experiences again in my 30s where like I'll come across something and I'm like, wow, that reminds me of an experience I had when I was 16 or 17, and I still feel like it still hurts. I still feel it in my body, right? Like our bodies carry what happens to us.
Of course.
I met a grandmother. I do a supervision course, and I met a clinician who's a mother, a grandmother, an accomplished person who still to this day created a beautiful career, you know, and did a lot of different things. Whenever there is conflict, becomes a scared little girl.
Yeah.
It goes back right back to that place and recognizes it and difficult to change and difficult to you know, so it's real.
It is real. And I think one of the power and the potential of being a teen, especially in this day and age when we have access to so many resources and so much information, to be able to kind of absorb those messages now and not have to learn them in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, right? Like there is a prime opportunity here to recognize, yes, there's going to be challenges. Yes, this is really hard. Yes, I'm struggling, but I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I'm not alone. And it's also possible for me as a teenager to find the tools I need to help me have consistent healing so that I don't feel, you know, imprisoned by my emotions, so that I'm not, God forbid, you know, we'll take it back, you know, we'll take it back to suicide for a minute. One of the things that I think, another thing that I think that people don't understand about suicide is that most people who are struggling with suicidal ideation or engaging in suicidal behavior are not actually interested in dying. They're not looking to die. They are looking for a way out of their pain. So if we go back to the brain for a minute, right? The amygdala and the bottom half of the brain, that the job of that half of the brain is to protect us. to find any means necessary to protect us, including things that are irrational or dangerous, right?
Yeah.
It's the part of the brain that acts before it thinks.
Yeah.
So when a person is in a state of distress, especially if that distress is continuous, their brain is going to start to look for answers that do not serve them, right?
Right.
And we can get stuck in what's called tunnel vision, which we see that there's only one way out.
Right.
Right? We see that the way out of the pain has to be this very, final thing, because our brains become. It's almost like you're wearing mental binoculars, and you're super hyper focused on one thing that's in front of you, and you're not necessarily able to take perspective on, oh, there's more out there than just what I'm seeing. There's more options for me than just what's here.
Right.
And there's a lot of different ways that we can bring people back to kind of like into their logical brain and help them take down the binoculars and recognize this, excuse me, suicide is not the answer. And I could pick there are different choices. But I think anyone who's ever experienced any form of mental health challenge, even if it was situational or temporary, knows how difficult it is to get out of that when you're in it. 100%. Right? Like when you're in it, I just said this to someone yesterday. I had an anxiety, like I'm very honest and open about the fact that I struggle with mental health, because I don't think it's fair to me to like run a mental health organization and be like, yes, I'm healed, I'm fine. No, I'm not. Right? Like I still go through stuff too.
Yeah.
And I said to someone the other day, I had a really intense, like few hours of an anxiety attack over Shabbos, like a few weeks ago. And it was like, especially on Shabbos, when I can't disengage, I can't run to my phone, I can't take a shower, I can't do the things that I know are going to help distract me. That's when it like,
yeah.
And like when I got out of it, it took a few hours, and I was like, wow, I literally turned into a different person. The person that I am when I'm experiencing anxiety and the person I am when I'm not are two different people.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think it's like, especially for teens, they say that to me all the time. They're like, I don't know who I become when I'm like this. It's not me. It's like, yeah, right. It's almost like you become a little bit possessed by the experience.
Yeah.
So is it possible to get out of it? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. Is it impossible? No. Right. It's
it's like so valuable, everything you're sharing. And I'm thinking we can start diving into the questions, so we have time
please.
to ask them. But this is brilliant. This is such a good intro. And I also wanted to add just one point to what you said, that the when a person is suicidal, they don't want to die, they want their pain to go away. And I heard it also by someone who actually was, had tried and had attempted and was in rehab. And I heard it in such a brilliant way. It's not that we want to die, it's that a part of us wants to die.
Yeah.
Part of us that just wants to be done, finished, no more pain. And looking at it that way, instead of looking at it like every part of me is going to go and then the pain is going to go away. It was a very powerful way of hearing it. But all that being said, let's dive in so we can get these questions.
Absolutely.
Sure. Okay, so we'll start with the first one.
Okay, so the question is, why do people die young? My sister passed away at 5 months, and I never really got over her death and still grieve and miss her every day. I never really understood how Hashem can do this to people. Losing my sister really affected my family. And I've heard that Hashem doesn't give people a challenge that they can't handle. But if that's true, then why do some people commit suicide? For me personally, part of my grief process ended up in me becoming suicidal. Baruch Hashem, now I'm fine, but if I hadn't gotten help when I did, I'm not sure if I would still be here. And it was really tough because my family was too busy grieving my sister that they didn't notice that I was depressed and suicidal. It was only 6 months later that my aunt realized something was wrong and helped me out.
So I think the question is, first of all, it's twofold. First of all, why do people die young? Especially having a little sister, unfortunately, that passed away. And the second part of the question is that if Hashem doesn't give people a challenge they can't handle, how is it that people commit suicide? Because they can't handle the challenge.
Right.
So brilliant.
So twofold, but before I go into answering, one thing that I have learned about the language around mental health and around suicide especially is that when we it's important to speak about suicide in a way that's compassionate and humanizes people rather than makes them an other. So I personally don't like to use the phrase committed suicide because it makes it sound like they're committing a crime, right? So died by suicide, right? Or, you know, yeah, I like to say died by suicide rather than committed suicide.
Yeah.
So it's twofold. The thing that I will say, and I just want to point to one part of that question, which is that the grief is still there. This person talks about the grief still being present. That's a true reality of grief, is that it stays with us, right?
Yeah.
When you love someone, it doesn't matter if they were alive for 5 months or 50 years, right? Grief becomes part of our existence. It's not about pushing, you know, and here's the thing about grief. Grief is an expression of love. When we grieve someone, it's because we loved them, right? Or because we still love them, even though we can't physically see them.
Yeah.
So I think, can grief be very intense and overwhelming and over encompassing? Absolutely. And I also want to point to the fact that this experience of grief potentially turning into our own pain of suicidal ideation is quite common, because when you're living with such an intense loss, it can be hard to think, you know, hard to figure out, how am I going to go forward in my life and live my life with this continuous pain of the person I love not being here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Bashi.
Yeah. I could relate very strongly to that. I experienced, you know, two very close losses in my life, and two things that are, you know, that are coming to mind. So first of all, you know, you're saying it's normal. Like when my mother passed away, and it was very, very, you know, sudden and tragic. Um, I had this feeling like I want to be with her.
Yeah.
And I won't say it was like, you know, an intentional, you know, like I have a plan of how to get there, but there was such a strong feeling of missing her, and feeling like she abandoned me. She left, you know, and God took her back, that I didn't want to be alone without her. I didn't
Absolutely.
want to exist without her. So that feeling, you know, I could really relate to. And the second thing I wanted to share was that grief, like, you know, you showed your shirt, Leigh, like the messy process. So I was, you know, going through grief in different ways in my life. And I remember hearing, like, you know, grief happens in stages. So there's denial, then there's the anger, there's a sadness, then there's whatever, and it gets to acceptance. And acceptance is, you know, finally you accept, okay, I'm, you know, this happened. So I was sharing because I said, you know, I feel like I've gotten to acceptance, and then it happens all over again. Something triggers it, like whether I see, you know, a daughter with her mother, or there's a thing for bubbies for my kids and grandmothers, and they don't have their grandmother. So all of a sudden, all that grief comes up again, and it can be like a choking emotion, overwhelming. So I said, you know, I don't understand. I thought I was accepting this and I'm done and I'm past it. And so someone, very smart person I was speaking with, drew a picture of a line, the way that I think of grief, that it's like a linear process, and then we're done. And then she turned over the page and she just made scribbles everywhere.
Yes.
And she said, this is grief. So I just wanted to add that, even for our listeners that are maybe visual, and that it sounds like, you know, this is also something that I'm sure, you know, this questioner who sent in this question experiences, but really anybody out there, just to have it, yeah, that it's okay and it's normal to go back into a place of, you know.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out, and there's so much to say about this question. It's such a really, I feel like the person who wrote this question just opened their heart and put it on in an email, and just really, you know, so much pain there, and so much grief and so much sadness. And it you know, it doesn't end. But one thing that I thought was very powerful, you know, when a family is grieving, there's like, there are bills to be paid, and carpool and things to do, and there's such intense pain that it feels like walking through mud or quicksand. And it's so important for there to be a person around, the aunt in the situation, but someone else who sees, hey, something is wrong, something is up, and steps in and helps out. I mean, this person saved a life. You know, we talk about, and it says it in Torah. We talk about how we come together. You know, Yidden come together, gathering together Jews. Why? Because a Yetzer Hara or Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul, is very selfish. It won't band together. And the Yetzer Tov, or our neshama, gathers together. So when we're together and we are united and we share our pain and we're not carrying it alone, we have the power of all of us together against this one pain. The pain doesn't necessarily be shared, but the power that we have as being together helps us carry it and makes it a little bit lighter. So that's really important.
Yeah. And I want to go also back into that question for a minute. I know we have a lot of other questions and I want to make sure we get to those also, but this question of like, if Hashem gives us challenges, that if Hashem gives us challenges we can handle, how come people die by suicide? Well, there's also a concept of free will, right? Hashem did not create us like robots. If Hashem wanted people to just follow A, B, C, D, he wouldn't have created people. He just would have kept the malachim around and we would have been done, right? Like Hashem puts us in this world and obviously, like, yes, everything is in Hashem's hands. And also, we also have choices. And the thing about suicide, and again, I'm going back to the brain because I think it's such an important concept, is that like when a person is in the throes of suicidal ideation, they're not necessarily making logical or healthy choice. They're not making logical or healthy choices. And so they may make a choice or that's, here's what I'm trying to say. It's really not a choice. They're almost not making a choice. It's like you say, oh, they chose to do this. Not really. If they're not acting from a place of rational, logical reasoning, they're not making a choice. It's almost like their nefesh bahamis overrides everything, right?
It's emotional. It's acting before thinking, like you said.
Absolutely.
And it's not being, but it's not being able to think.
It's not being able to think. It's right. It's not being able to think. And on that one other piece of that question is like, why does Hashem make these things happen? I wish I knew the answer to that. If I knew the answer to that, I would have bottled it up and sold it to everybody already. And, one thing I tell people all the time, which I really believe, is that I wish there was not a need for my work, right? Like, even that we're having a conversation and that so many people submitted questions about suicidal ideation, like, I wish that we did not have a need for this, right? If I had the answer to that, I would have just like, blasted it out to the world already. But I recently, when the war in Israel started, Rabbi YY did a live with Eli Bear from Hatzalah. And he said something that it really clicked for me. It was like, somebody asked that same question, like, why is Hashem doing this? And Rabbi Jacobson said, he was like, I don't know the answer, but if it makes you feel better. Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem the same questions that we're asking. Eliyahu Navi asked the same questions. David HaMelech, all of the great people who came before us, all the tzaddikim that we admire and look up to, and we learn their chassidus and their Torah, and we imbue our lives with their teachings, had the same questions of Hashem that us mere regular people do. So I don't know if that's like a source of comfort for people, but we're all asking the same questions.
Yeah. Exactly.
We're in good company.
Yeah, and I think it actually segues into our next question because we're really already addressing this topic. The next question is, I'm going through a really hard challenge and it feels like it's never going to end. No one understands what I'm going through. I feel like I want to give up. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that. How do I feel more empowered to get through this?
Right. And that ties into that question because I kind of heard, we're saying that you're describing the amygdala and the bottom half of the brain that takes over. And then we're not acting from a place of rational choice or compassion for ourselves. So it's almost like if we're in that place, we're kind of done for. And then how do you come out from that place?
How do you bring yourself back to here?
Back to the front of the brain. Exactly.
If I could just, bring up something that has actually been transformational for me. Last year, I did a learning class in honor of both my parents, like every second Shabbos. And what we did was we explored a book. It's actually called Transforming Darkness into Light. It was unbelievable. Why? Because for me as a Jew, Like I hear, there's a spark of Hashem inside of us. So because I'm visual, I'm like, okay, there's this tiny little spark that's just like, every once in a while. And the whole idea that the book was bringing about was that I am a soul. That's who I am. That's because, my body is just covering and housing the soul, but the soul is everything. Because if I don't have that soul, that's, then my heart won't be pumping and my body won't be moving and my brain won't be working. My amygdala won't kick in or whatever needs to happen. It has to be a soul. And
right.
So the reason why I feel so empowered by that thought is because, this question is saying, no one understands what I'm going through. That's the first thing I wanted to address. So the deepest part of me is godly, is my soul. And what's so beautiful about that idea is that anything that happens in this world, it doesn't matter what challenge or what situation we've been through, experiences, diagnoses, nothing will affect the deepest part of me, which is my neshama. There's nothing in this world that can affect that part of me. And that piece that I was learning was so powerful because it kind of helps me realize that everything I go through and all these challenges, they're not me. They're not who I am. They're just, something I'm going through, something I'm feeling, something I'm thinking. And so when we say no one understands what I'm going through, God understands everything you're going through.
Yeah.
And not only that, because there's a piece of him inside of you, because you're a Jewish girl or boy. I don't know if this was sent in by a guy or a girl, but because he's a part of you, when you're in pain, he's in pain. When you are facing an extremely hard challenge, he's not the type of creator and God, CEO of the company that has his feet up and he's smoking a cigar and he's just like, ha ha ha, let's see how she's going to deal with this. Right. He's there with you. He understands everything. And for me, I see the words, how do I feel empowered to get through this? For me to know that is empowering because, they say God doesn't give you what you can't handle. God doesn't give you what you can't handle because he is with you. He's going to handle it with you. And right. I'll just finish like my relationship with God. I say to God, like, if you created everything, then you created this challenge and you have the solutions. So help me out, help me out, like help me find. And every time I've asked God, even though it didn't happen in the moment, he's always led me to a place where people understood, people can be there for me, support. So that's just like, that was coming up for me. I wanted to just jump in
I'm happy that you went in that direction because that's where I was going to go too. It's interesting. I start my day. I'm a writer. That's like my first love. My love language is writing. Really. That's how I show up in the world. And so, yes, I daven. Yes, I say Tehillim. Yes, I do all the things, but I also write a letter to Hashem. I try every morning before I start, even if it's one sentence, right? Wow. And when the challenges in my life have been particularly intense, those are when the letters are like, okay, Hashem, it's you, and like, we're in this together. I know you're with me.
Yeah.
It's also really hard. So like, I trust that you're with me. And I'm also asking you, please help me find the right path. Please help connect me to the right people. Because here's the thing, right? We're not a person is not an island unto themselves. We're not meant to exist in this world by ourselves and go through our challenges alone, right? Why did Hashem create Chava? So that Adam wouldn't be alone, right? That's the very beginning of our Torah. People are supposed to be together.
Yeah.
I ask Hashem, I know you're with me. I also need you to show me like the physical shluchim in this world, be it a book, a shir, whoever it's going to be that's going to help me be able to navigate this challenge in a way that's going to help me come out stronger. And the thing about being motivated is that it's very hard to be motivated when you're in it by yourself, right? How do I motivate myself? Well, there are things you could do. Well, all right. I know I keep coming back to the brain, but like, the thing is that our brains are also embodied, right? Our brain is not just like existing up here on an island by itself, the same way that people don't exist by themselves. Our brain impacts our body and our body impacts our brain. Yeah. And when we are feeling overwhelmed, disconnected, depressed, suicidal, it impacts how our bodies feel too. And so to motivate up here, you also have to be able to work with what's in here. Yeah. So like, you know, showing up. I mean, I really believe that the way to motivate ourselves through a hard time is in small, measurable moments. Not in like, I'm going to do this big thing now. It's going to totally change my life and I'm going to shift. Especially, I think as teenagers, we're like, right, where's that like big kick that's going to send me off in the right direction and then I'll be healed. It's like, no, where are my small, measurable things that I can do once a day, twice a day to help me feel motivated just to get to the next moment? Because the healing happens moment by moment. It's not somewhere off in the far distant future when I'm, in an adult, and it's not whatever. It's right here, right now. What can I do? So, right. So like, what are the small things that I could do right now to motivate myself? Is it saying a parak of Tehillim? Is it giving myself a hug? Is it nourishing my body? Right. Eating something, even if it's a piece of toast, right? I know that when I feel really anxious, the last thing I want to do is eat. Drink some water, right? Like do something to help your body feel, our minds, our bodies, and neshamas, they all have to work together because Bashi, you're right. We are a soul. We are a soul encapsulated in the body, but our body still has to show up. Right? Hashem put us in this physical world so that we can utilize the physical to elevate the spiritual. So we need all of those components together. And so the motivation, should not happen alone. But even if you are doing it by yourself, there's small measurable things that you can return to, right? Your touchstones. What are your touchstones? For me, my touchstones are taking a shower, going for a walk, making sure I have regular scheduled appointments with my therapist, right? Like knowing that I have things that I can turn to so that I'm not in it by myself, because it's very hard to motivate on your own.
And what, even what you said before, my mind is going blank. I think that, like, how do I feel empowered to get through this? This is getting through this is empowering the fact that you sent in a question.
You even sent in a question. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because there are many people that are not even at a place where they can admit or that they're even aware that this is for them. And to be aware and to reach out is unbelievably empowering for this person who sent this in. And yes, we can sit here and give you, practical strategies. I thought of a few others also as Leigh was talking, like for me, let's say music, walking. But at the end of the day, you can get through this. And the way to get through it, like you were saying, Leigh, with the healing piece, the painful part of it is healing. Because the only way through it is through it.
Right.
We try to get around it, under it, over it. Yes, of course, rise above. But if we're face to face and we're honest and aware with what's happening right now in my life, and maybe I'm not yet healed, or I'm not yet over the hump or over this, next growing stone, or however you want to call it, that's because I have to go through this to be able to heal. And the healing will come. It's hanging in there, reaching out for support, like we were saying, taking one step at a time, because there's not much in life that we can control. Situations where challenges, people, relationships, but the one thing that we can control is what we say and what we do in this world, and also our perspective. So the attitude that we have as we go through it. But otherwise, the challenge is here for a reason. None of us can answer that. Hashem has to answer that. But this is part of your journey, and this will empower you, if anything. And in my experience, and I mean, Shua could probably speak for himself, like I've seen that any challenges I've been through, obviously not in the moment, was I like, oh, wow, this is so empowering. I'm such a cool person after this.
I'm so excited for the lesson that's coming out of this.
Yeah, that never happened.
No.
Afterwards, like I truly believe that I am the person I am today because of the challenges I've been through. And if I didn't go through them, I wouldn't be who I am today.
I often tell people on that topic, when I look at the experiences that I've had in my life, the traumatic experiences that have shaped the kind of person I am and the way I show up for people now as a healer, right? And as an educator and as a professional, I tell people all the time, I wish those things had not happened, right? Like, in many ways, I'm grateful because those traumatic experiences gave me an insight into being able to support other people and also made me who I am. But if I could live without them, I would rather live without them. But since I went through them, like I might as well right?
Yeah.
Take
Yeah.
what I can from the experience. But when you're in it, it's very hard. And I think like we can normalize, like it's hard, right?
Of course.
Just
Of
because
course.
Hashem gives us a challenge and he knows that we can do it doesn't mean, you know.
And maybe even normalize that it's okay not to feel empowered, because as we're
Sure.
going through it, we don't. And that empowerment, what I've found in my life and with many people that I've shared with, is that when we reach out for support, whether it's, someone who's been through it or a support group, I mean, even for the first questioner, I want to encourage, there are grief support groups. There are ways to go through these experiences, but without having to do it alone.
Yeah.
And if you need resources or you need more help in that area, you can always reach out to us on Jewish Teen Talk, and we will, find you the resources and help you, with that journey of healing.
Right. Leigh's organization as well. I mean, that's a
Yes.
tremendous resource.
We have a warm line where it's for people, teens and adults alike, who are looking for a listening ear, for resources, for referrals. We also have not an extensive one, but we do have a therapy fund where we help offset the cost of mental health services for people, because I know that that's like a big one. It's like, I'm motivated to get help, but also like, where am I finding $250 a week to get that help?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And we'll post some more details about resources that are available in the description of the
Sure.
episode. I did want to point out that and again, there's so much to talk about on each of these questions, and I really wanted to thank all of the questioners for writing in and allowing themselves to become vulnerable, even if it's an anonymous way.
Yeah.
But putting yourself out there is not an easy thing to do. You know, for the guys, I think a good example is exercise. For the girls, maybe more dieting. But the same way that when we do things for ourselves to improve ourselves physically, and we don't necessarily see the changes in the mirror on a daily basis, but after a while of consistent work, you turn around one day and wow, that's incredible. Look how I've grown. Look how far I've come.
Yeah.
Mental health is exactly the same way. So it's small changes plus time equals a big difference.
That's, so the reason why we named our organization the Long Short Road, right? It comes from Tanya, the concept, right, of the short long way or the long short way. There are no shortcuts. You can try to take as many shortcuts as you want. You're still going to get to dead ends, and you're going to have to turn around and go the long way anyway, right? So health is not, there's no shortcuts, right? I've been in this professionally for a long time, and I've been struggling with mental health for as long as I can remember, right? Like, as long as I've been a human, basically, I can remember struggling with anxiety and depression. And it's a long road. And it's also really important to sometimes turn around and see how far you've already come.
Of course. Yeah.
To be able to feel empowered in the, maybe I'm not where I want to be yet, but look at how much I've already accomplished in my journey, right?
Yeah. Okay. I think we have important questions that, we want to get to.
Yes.
You want to do the next one? But it's all within the same idea. And hopefully, we can't necessarily fix situations that, we find out about or make them go away, which, like, Leigh was saying, we just want to have the answers. We just want to take all that pain away. That's in God's hands.
Yeah.
But at least we can approach this subject all together and grow together. And I think the underlying message that we keep giving over on Jewish Teen Talk is you are not alone.
Right.
And this journey does not have to be, or this challenge or this grieving process, whatever it is that you're going through, to know that you're not alone. And this is how we grow. This is how we get empowered, is that we reach out, we band together, because we need people.
Yeah.
And we need each other.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to have time for one more question, and I want to recognize that whoever else sent in the question and allowed themselves to become vulnerable, and put themselves out there and did not hear their question addressed, I wanted to let you know that you are heard, you are recognized, you are valued, you're important. We will get to your questions, but might not have time this episode. The next question is, what should I do when I want to commit suicide, but I know I can't because Hashem doesn't let? So I want to preface by saying that I do not believe there is ever a bad reason to not commit suicide. We need you. Stick
Right.
around.
Right. If the reason is because Hashem doesn't let, then let that be the reason that you stay.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And
So,
also, yeah.
go ahead, Bash. No, go
No,
ahead.
no, just the word, now that you pointed it out. What should I do when I want to commit suicide? What should I do when I feel like I'm in so much
I want-
pain that I
that I
just want
want-
it all to end and I want to die through suicide
Right.
so that the pain ends? But, you know, I don't know if I could expound a little bit on that question, but then there is the idea that even though in this world, all that pain stops, you know, someone, and this is what I've heard and people have shared, you know, like when our neshama, when our soul goes into the next phase, I call it, you know, especially since my parents passed, it's hard to say another world, but the next phase, which is more spiritual, the soul continues to be in pain. I mean, that's according to Tyra. So I wonder
And
if
not only that, but the neshama, you know, we are on a finite timeline as humans, right? Our neshama does not have a finite timeline. Our neshama is infinite, right? Because it's like a kami mamash, and it's going to continue its journey beyond what we see here on a physical plane.
Yeah.
The thing that I want to, I'm trying to think about how I want to phrase this answer. It's interesting because the way that this question or phrase the answer of like Hashem doesn't let, right? There's a lot of things that Hashem doesn't let that we do, right? Because we're people. Hashem gave us a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, and he gave us challenges. And when we are faced with those challenges, yes, Hashem runs everything. We also have free choice of how we're going to be, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that could be a source of empowerment. It's like Hashem is giving me this challenge. He also doesn't want me to go. He's giving me the option to be able to see everything around me. He also wants me to stay.
Yeah.
Right? You know, could we be Michal Shabbos? Yes, but that's not what Hashem wants of us. Right? Could we stop keeping kosher? Sure, but that's not what Hashem wants of us. It's you know.
I spoke to a therapist. He's a New Yorker, so he's a little bit more abrasive. And he was telling me that somebody came to his office and said, I really want to commit suicide. His response was, why haven't you? And I think that the question is almost like flipped, like kind of making light of it in a sense, but it's also really challenging us to think about there is a reason why we have not done this. That means that we have value, we value and appreciate ourselves, and there are things in the world and ideas and things that we have and things that we have to give to others that are holding us here, and they are things that are really important to us. They are our why. And if we can look into that why and really understand why we haven't done it, then focus on those things, grow those things, because those are really important for us.
Right. And I'll one thing I'll add is, you know, there's this idea of like passive suicidal ideation and also active or acute, right? And there are some people who can live with thoughts of suicide sometimes for a very long time and never act on it, right? And again, I just want to bring it back to that idea that suicidal ideation is not a desire to die as so much as it's a desire for the pain to stop. And so if we could put the emphasis on, well, how do I help mitigate or offset or work with the pain today? Right? How do I live for today? Because I think that one of the issues that people who are experiencing suicidal ideation is like, well, this is going to last forever. We see it as all or nothing. It's either here or it's not. It's like, well, how do I empower myself to be alive for this hour, to be alive for this next hour, to be alive for the next day,
or even a minute, 1 minute,
even a minute. Sometimes, you know, over COVID, right? Like when all the crazy was happening with the pandemic and all the, I had a newborn and I had COVID myself, and I was like, you know, dealing with people's, the hotline was like going off the hook, and somebody asked me like, how are you? I asked someone, how are you doing? They're like, I'm taking it hour by hour. I was like, that's great. I'm taking it millisecond by millisecond.
Wow.
Right? Like it's the hardest thing we can do when we are in pain, I think, is drop into the present moment. Because we want the pain to stop. But the way we get the pain to stop is by holding it close and giving it a hug. You know what I mean?
And
like
also,
wonderful.
Yeah. No, it's exactly what you're saying. Yeah, you know what, Leigh, like what you were saying, that it's not that someone wants to die, it's that someone wants the pain to die.
Yeah.
So the pain to end. So maybe if we look at this question with that idea in mind, instead of what should I do when I want to die by suicide, but I know I can't because Hashem doesn't let, what if we rephrase it to what should I do when I want all the pain I'm going through to go away, but I know I can because Hashem does let, because and sorry, but I know I can't because Hashem doesn't let. If that was a question and it was phrased with pain, then of course we would say, because Hashem is a loving father, because Hashem created you, created these challenges, he knows you the best from everyone in the world, even your own parents. He does not want you to suffer. Maybe there's a reason why he gave you pain. And like we said, we can't take pain away from this world. And Hashem has to tell us why he even created it from the very beginning.
Right.
To suffer, he does not want you to suffer. And so all the pain you're going through, you're not the first person who's been through it. Yes, all our experiences are unique, but the underlying challenge or things, there are many teens out there that are going through that too. And even adults.
More than are saying out loud.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the common themes, the common thread that I noticed in all of the questions was this feeling of I'm in it by myself. No one else is going through this with me. You know, I did an exercise once where I was in a high school, a frum girls high school, and I had it was the whole school together. It was like 600, 700 girls. And I had everybody close their eyes. And I was like, okay, no one is seeing you. Your eyes are closed.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you've ever, and I did a series of questions with them.
Wow.
90% of the students raised their hands to all of the questions that I asked about mental health.
Wow.
And when they opened their eyes, I was like, ladies, I just want you to know that even though you couldn't see your classmates and your peers raise their hands, almost everybody did to almost every question I asked. So
Wow.
if you need any indication that you're not alone in this, look at the person sitting next to you that you might not even know. You pass them in the hall every day, and sometimes you smile at them as you walk by. They are going through a challenge just like you.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
even though our pain is unique, our personal pain is unique. Pain is not unique to just one person, right? And I know for me, as a support person for people who are struggling, and also having gone through my own traumas and my own pain and my own experiences with losing people to suicide and my own experiences with suicidal ideation, it was always helpful for me to know that I wasn't by myself.
Yeah.
Oh, you're too? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. We can hold on. Like that can be a life raft for people, is
Right.
knowing, that we're in this together.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wow. It's been amazing having you here with us to address these questions. A lot of times, questions come in and Shu and I are like, we don't know the answers to that. How do we, so this is, a lot of times,
yeah, your experience and the knowledge that you bring, it is really going to, I'm sure going to help the people who ask the question and all of the listeners.
Yeah.
We will put resources, Leigh's organization, other resources that are available for people struggling with suicidal ideation, whether passive or active, and other resources that are available. Keep sending in your questions. Besides for the fact that sending in a question helps you not feel alone with your pain, it helps others who can relate to what you're going through.
Yes.
So it's really important. And we're going to keep trying to answer them. Thank you so much for your time, Leigh.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for making this available. Like, I wish this podcast had existed when I was in high school. Like, where was this when I was going through this stuff? Really, Yasher Koch for doing this, because the teams
Same
need
here,
it.
by the way.
Yeah, we're that's why we're here.
Yeah.
We all feel that way. We were these teen, there was nowhere to go with these, so for sure we'll keep coming back and keep sending in questions, and every question will be addressed. Just hang in there. And thanks again, Leigh, and for the amazing work you're doing.
Yeah.
My pleasure. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.
How do we